So earlier this month, there was a pastors training conference in Texas. And basically, what they were doing is they're inviting all these potential pastors to come by. We're going to give you a crash course in how to be a megachurch pastor, or at least what we hope will be a megachurch if you're really good and you bring in people. And whatever, there's nothing weird about that. There are training sessions like that all the time for different things. So, whatever. Now, that conference was run by a group called the Remnant Alliance. And the Texas Observer recently did a story on the Remnant Alliance. And I found this passage interesting to describe who they are. The Remnant Alliance is an amalgam of independent organizations that share goals and sometimes personnel. It operates as a sort of clearinghouse for Christian nationalist ideology and is building its coalition with the 5-step plan. First, local pastors have to have a biblical worldview. Second, they have to teach a biblical worldview from the pulpit with the help of prepared notes. Third, congregants are trained on biblical citizenship and constitutional defense through Patriot Academy. Fourth, pastors form a salt and light ministry at their church and are paired with like a Christian nationalist liaison. And finally, the entire congregation is mobilized to extend the kingdom of God with the help of advocacy groups. They don't just want to start a church, they want to take over the world. That is what they are training these pastors to do. And they recently held a session to train them. So it's very disturbing, isn't it? So, in short, they want to recruit pastors, build their churches through a Christian nationalist agenda, then take over their local communities. And one of the speakers at this rally earlier this month in August was a guy named Jim Abney, who is the Florida faith coordinator for this organization. He is also one of the Salt and Light liaisons. And he spoke about how in his hometown in Florida, in Lake Wales, Florida, this training actually helped them take over the world, basically. And what he said is that in his hometown, I'm going to show you this. This is an article from a local newspaper called The Ledger. Look at this headline. This is from March of 2024. Lake Wales Mayor Jack Hilligoss, a pastor, turns his church into a political force. Abney said, "This is my church. This is what my pastor started. This is what we have done." And this is considered a success story. And look at the beginning of this. Jack Hilligoss, senior pastor at High Point Church in Lake Wales, stood on stage on a recent Sunday morning telling congregants that if they were not already registered to vote, they could get right with God and sign up after the service. Directing church members to a by the way, that's technically legal. Directing church members to a registration table, Hilligoss said they would find Lake Wales City Commissioner Danny Kruger, who is a member of our church and has been a fantastic commissioner here for Lake Wales. And he needs your support. In fact, when you go to vote, just think of this: Danny and Danny. Okay? That's all I'm going to say. So now he's telling them how to vote, which is not okay if you want to keep your IRS tax exemption. But this is what they do. They don't just build out a church, they get you to become voting citizens, and then they tell you how to vote so you could take over the community. So this guy who was speaking at this training, Jim Abney, he was saying, we did this in my place and it was great. And guess what? It turns out that pastor is now the mayor of the town. And the article goes on to say the pastor turned mayor ended a city tradition of offering proclamations for LGBTQ Pride Month and has appointed members of his church to city boards. Looking beyond Lake Wales, Hilligoss has launched an initiative aimed at helping conservative evangelical Christians gain majorities on all municipal commissions in Polk County. So now that he's done it in his area, he wants to broaden that circle and get his people taking over all the areas. Again, this is the success story. They want to replicate this everywhere. As you might guess, they have Christian invocations at every city council meeting. Apparently Hilligoss was very mad because a transgender atheist was allowed to give an invocation before he became mayor, and he's not going to let that happen again. So they only basically let Christian pastors deliver those invocations. Hilligoss is also an election denier. He's an anti-masker. He appears to be a MAGA cultist. But the thing is, the reason all these people know you could take over the world, or at least your hometown, is because mayoral elections and local political elections are very low turnout affairs. Like if an election is on November's election day, a lot of people will come out to vote. If an election for city council is in like May, nobody's coming out to vote, which means if you can get your mega church to vote, it really could sway an election. And they know that and they want to make that happen. So he knows, Hilligoss knew that if he could convince his congregation to vote and get the church members to canvass on his behalf and knock on doors, it could help him get on city council, which he did. And now he's mayor. So this is what Abney was promoting to the people in the audience. He also said in his speech that the biggest villain, if you will, was the LGBTQ community in trying to get Hilligoss to become mayor. And now what's the end game for all this? Abney said the end game is winning converts, or as he put it, expanding God's kingdom. And in Lake Wales, they were doing that by creating their own private school. And this is where it gets really interesting because he urged all these pastors at the training, don't just build a church. Don't just expand your church. Don't just get elected to local political positions so you could take over the world. No. Build private schools because in places like Florida, they'll give you money to do it, which means you're taking taxpayer money to fuel religious indoctrination. He said these things, and we have video of it. And he also said, why are we doing that? Because we can use taxpayer money to effectively baptize more children into Christianity. And all of this is done at the expense of taxpayers. And he talked about the money in this video. Let me play the video for you, then I'll talk about it in just a second. And there's not much to watch on your screen because he's giving a slideshow and just talking over it, but listen to his voice.
And let me show you the results of participating and engaging our community, all right? So when Pastor Jack first decided to run for mayor, we were in the middle of a new building program, getting ready to move into the new building. We had an average attendance of about 400. Since then, we now have an average attendance of 1,300, and 2,000 people now call High Point Church their home. You will lose some people at the beginning when you take a stand, but God will prune the vine and start new growth. We started a Christian school called Providence Academy. Anybody here located in the state of Florida? All right, state of Florida. If you do not have a Christian school in your church, I don't know what to tell you. The state of Florida will pay your church, out of taxpayer dollars, $7,800 per pupil per year to attend your private school. Okay? So, we started Providence Academy. In our first year, we just completed 103 students. But out of that 103 students, we baptized 32 of them. A private school, small town, Lake Wales, Florida. And the state this year will send High Point Church, Providence Academy, $1.3 million to cover our expenses. If you have a church in Florida, you need to be doing this. You want to make a difference in your community? It's generational. And many of these students now their families now attend High Point Church. We have baptized a total since Pastor Jack became mayor, 197 in our church.
So it's bad enough that these Christians want to take over local governments in order to act out their theocratic fantasies. They are literally bragging about how they can use taxpayer dollars to boost their conversion numbers by targeting children. If I told you an LGBTQ group held a conference like this and said the same stuff, Christians would call it grooming. But now, and they would demand like statewide investigations, but it's cool when they do it, right? Florida is not alone here, by the way. Voucher programs are on the rise across the country, specifically because they allow taxpayer dollars to flow from public schools to private religious schools. But in Florida, where, like he said, they get $7,800 per kid per year, it has been a drain on resources. Check this out. This is from the Florida Phoenix newspaper. When it was signed into law last year, it was estimated that Florida's vouchers for everybody would cost between $200 and $700 million a year. However, once this school year started with everybody eligible, the cost exploded and is now estimated at between $2.8 and $4.2 billion. And about 70% of the new recipients were already attending private schools before vouchers. So again, the private schools don't need any of this money. The public schools absolutely do, but they're not getting it because in Florida, where Republicans control everything, they decided to take that money from public schools and send it to private schools. And all those private schools are religious. And now you have this religious pastor saying, hey, if you have a church in Florida, you need to start a private school now because you could take taxpayer money to fund it and you can win baptisms. You can convert children. And this is like a prize to them. This is a notch in their wall somewhere. Like, public schools in Florida are suffering right now because Republicans in the state government have given this massive gift to Christian schools. They are ranked 48th in the nation when it comes to teacher pay. And yet this is how they're spending their money, and the church leaders know it, and they want to take advantage of it because they don't care about kids or public schools. And they're like, what? We can do a religious indoctrination and we don't even have to dip into tithe money for it? Sure, let's do it. They don't care. I asked some lawyer friends, like, this is all totally not okay, right? And the Freedom from Religion just said in a blanket statement, voucher schemes are all about giving greedy churches government welfare, using taxpayer money raided from the public schools that 90% of our children rely on for their education. Now, Americans United for Separation, excuse me, separation of church and state, they were a little more direct about this. This is from their CEO, Rachel Laser, where she said the problem isn't churches starting schools. The problem is taxpayer funding for these schools or any private schools. Americans United opposes private school vouchers because they force taxpayers to fund religious education, a clear violation of religious freedom. The bottom line is that public money should fund public schools, which are inclusive, improve communities, and strengthen democracy. We should be giving public schools the proper resources to serve all families, not diverting money to private, mostly religious schools that serve relatively few students and do not welcome all children. Couldn't agree with that more. I think that's absolutely right. The pastors in that audience didn't seem to care. They don't care if public schools fail as long as a few more kids agree to accept Jesus before they're old enough to think for themselves. Wanted to show you that clip, though, because very, very disturbing.